Good afternoon. My name is Francis Bradley. I'm the President and CEO of Electricity Canada. Je suis ici pour vous parler de l'avenir du système d'électricité au Canada et de certaines des choses qui pourraient se faire pour l'améliorer. Last week in Davos, Prime Minister Carney said, "Canada has what the world wants. We are an energy superpower." I believe that to be true. Today, I'm proud to be here launching Electricity Canada's State of the Electricity Industry Report for 2026. This year's report is titled, Forging Canada's Energy Future. To forge is to create something strong or lasting through effort. That's what the electricity sector wants to happen right now in Canada. Last summer, I was privileged to go with Electricity Canada's Board of Directors to visit the Robert Bourassa generating station in northern Quebec. I wish I could show you photographs of what I saw there, but security concerns prevent photos from being shared. It was incredible. We stood underneath a turbine rotor that weighs 100 tons. It was spinning at a precise 133.33 revolutions per minute, about 200 kilometers an hour at its very edge. There's 16 of these units in the facility, taking water from the La Grande River and spinning magnets to generate electricity. What impressed me wasn't just the speed of them, it was the precision. The margin between the rotor and the stators, traveling at 200 kilometers an hour, was such that if it was a millimeter out, it wouldn't work. Those inconceivably large turbines have been delivering electric power to millions every day for the last 45 years, and they'll be doing that for at least another 45. The Robert Bourassa generating station was built out of the confidence that we can build something bold, complex, and nation-shaping. Today, in 2026, Canadians are experiencing a renewed sense of ambition once again, shaping the future of the electricity system. Nous avons pour tâche de recommencer à bâtir en grand, avec décision et ambition. Nous le ferons tout en prouvant aux Canadiens que l'abordabilité, la fiabilité et la prospérité durable demeurent au cœur de l'avenir de notre électricité. Nous avons une bonne longueur d'avance. L'électricité est un modèle de réussite canadienne. Au Canada, nous avons un des systèmes d'électricité les plus propres et les plus fiables au monde. Plus de 80% de notre électricité est déjà sans émissions. Les émissions du secteur ont diminué de 50% depuis 2005. But there is a lot of work to do. There are 4 areas I want to discuss today. Enhancing an east-west electricity system, building capacity for our supply chain, ensuring the security of our grid, and dealing with the threats of wildfires. So let's start by talking about the most important task ahead of the electricity sector in Canada, developing an integrated east-west electricity system. Now, the federal government and provincial governments are exploring opportunities with regard to this. As well they should, because peak provincial electricity demand is forecast to continue to increase. Canada will need to add substantial net new generation to meet growing demand in the coming years. Historically, the Canadian electricity trade has focused on north-south exchanges. But events this past year has given us pause to look within Canada for other opportunities. This brought us to the question, if we can't count on our trading partners, our traditional electricity trading partners, could we trade more across provincial borders? And the answer is, it can be done. More easily than you might think. All we need to do is start with what's already there. Interties allow electricity to be shared between 2 or more systems. There are major interties that Canadian electricity providers use for north-south exchanges. But what most people don't know is that east-west trade is already happening, albeit at a lower volume. A key intertie connects Ontario and Quebec, helping both jurisdictions manage complementary peak demand seasons. Ontario shares power with Quebec during the winter. Quebec shares power with Ontario during the summer. There are similar interties across the country. A recent Deloitte study commissioned by Electricity Canada assessed the current utilization of all interprovincial interties, and it examined provincial demand forecasts out to 2040. So to make this future work, the federal government needs to partner with provinces, system operators, and utilities to advance coordinated, data-driven, interregional electricity planning that prioritizes optimizing existing transmission infrastructure and trade corridors, and ensure that interprovincial transmission lines are valued property and are financially viable. We also need to look at building our domestic supply chains. Right now, it takes up to 7 years to source gas turbines and nearly 4 years for some large transformers. Provincial forecasts show that demand, and therefore our material needs, will continue to increase. Strained supply chains create project risks for Canadian electricity companies and ultimately increases our customers' bills. Electricity companies are working to be part of the solution. Much of the $30 billion that the electricity sector spends in Canada each year already goes to domestic suppliers. Hydro One, for example, spends 93% of its investment dollars within Canadian suppliers, including a recent partnership with Northern Transformers. Companies across Canada, such as Ontario Power Generation and Hydro-Quebec, have established local supplier programs and included supply chain development into their long-term growth strategies. La sécurité est aussi un sujet de préoccupation. Le Centre canadien pour la cybersécurité ne laisse planer aucun doute. Les infrastructures essentielles canadiennes sont confrontées à des mesures et des menaces réelles et concrètes. Le risque n'est pas théorique. Les fournisseurs d'infrastructures essentielles canadiennes ont déjà été attaqués. Des hôpitaux et des réseaux de la santé, des organismes gouvernementaux, des entreprises de pétrole et de gaz et bien d'autres se sont fait voler des données et ont vu leurs activités perturbées. Quant aux compagnies d'électricité, elles ont eu des problèmes de facturation et ont perdu des renseignements parce que leurs systèmes d'informatique ont subi de graves attaques. Government and industry must continue to enhance collaboration. That means making sure that well-intentioned legislation, like Bill C-8, which would impose new cybersecurity requirements, doesn't inadvertently put a stop to information sharing by not clearly defining how regulators can handle data. That would be a setback that we simply cannot afford. And finally, wildfire risks have become a significant threat to Canada's electricity system. In the past 3 years, almost every province and territory has been affected, with British Columbia, Alberta, Saskatchewan, Quebec, and the Northwest territories experiencing the most destruction and local economic impact. According to Statistics Canada, 2023 is considered one of the most severe years for wildfires in Canada, with over 5,500 incidents and a total of 17.3 million hectares affected, vastly exceeding the 10-year average of 1.38 million hectares. For the electricity industry, these wildfires pose two immediate challenges. Electricity transmission and distribution lines are particularly susceptible to damage from wildfires. The cost for replacing a single pole typically ranges from $3,000 to $6,000 Canadian, so this adds up. Power lines can also be a source of ignition under extreme conditions. They can ignite wildfires through contact with trees and branches, downed power lines, conductor slap, or sparking hardware. All of these factors can jeopardize public safety, destroy communities, damage electrical equipment, extend customer outages, and impose legal liabilities on the industry. The electricity sector has been quick to develop wildfire mitigation plans. AltaLink, ATCO, and Fortis Alberta are collaborating to protect communities and developing public safety power shutoffs. But current government policies, funding, and regulatory approaches, especially the economic regulatory models used by utility boards, do not sufficiently support the proactive actions industry must take to prevent wildfires, including potential wildfire ignitions. We need a review of federal and provincial legal frameworks to ensure appropriate protections related to potential industry-caused ignitions. We need to establish a formal coordination mechanism between the electricity industry and Parks Canada to address vegetation management on federal lands. And we need to introduce a resiliency tax credit to support weather hardening of electricity infrastructure and to protect the system from growing exposure to extreme weather events, including wildfires. Finally, there are other recommendations made in our State of the Industry report, and I'll just touch on a couple. Implementing a 2-year federal approval timeline for all electricity projects, drawing lessons from the major projects office process, advancing continuous red tape reduction, and minimizing duplication with provincial reviews. Reforming the Fisheries Act and associated regulations to adopt a risk-based approach for electricity infrastructure, focusing on impacts to fish populations, and recognizing the unique operational characteristics of hydroelectric facilities. Simplifying and extending the clean technology and clean electricity investment tax credits, and extending eligibility beyond 2035. And finally, repealing or substantially revising the Eiffel rules to remove unintended barriers to capital-intensive electricity infrastructure investments. With a new government dedicated to making Canada an energy superpower, there is now a clear opportunity to establish a credible roadmap for success. The focus is already there. What matters now is the execution. The opportunity is before us to forge Canada's electricity sector. That opportunity, we need to take it. Thank you. Merci.
Natasha Bilewski, Canada's National Observer. On interties, pardon me, I'm a little sick. I was wondering what your engagements with the provinces have been like. Specifically, whether there's any really enthusiastic partners that are sort of pushing forward possible intertie projects, but also where there maybe isn't as much of an appetite for that.
Yeah, I think we're at the early stages of these conversations from a federal, provincial, territorial standpoint. I would note that interties were specifically mentioned in the MOU between the Government of Canada and the Government of Alberta. So I think it's early days at this stage, but we now clearly have a government that is at least interested in engaging in these conversations. So we're hopeful that we're going to see successful results coming out of these conversations. But the challenge, of course, is always ensuring that jurisdictions and local concerns are taken into consideration.
And to your point about trying to streamline and reduce duplication in regulatory processes, obviously there's impact assessments, but I'm wondering if you can point to any specific examples. Maybe, like, I know Fisheries Act regulations can sometimes be involved in these projects. So any areas in particular that you'd like to target to reduce the duplication, et cetera?
Sure. A couple of things. First, we've had successive governments, speeches from the thrones, budget speeches that have committed to a one project, one review regime, and we're not there. So to begin with, we continue to have multiple reviews at multiple levels of government, and so if we can reduce it so that. And it isn't a matter of not undertaking reviews. It's to undertake effective reviews so that good projects are able to move forward. So, the first thing is that one project, one assessment, one review. Recognition between different levels of government of reviews certainly would be helpful. The 2-year commitment that we've seen for, at least with respect to the major projects office and their projects that they want to move forward. We've also understand that there is a commitment to attempt to do that with other projects as well. And then finally, as you note, the Fisheries Act is one in particular that our members continue to trip over. There were changes brought to the Act in 2019 that essentially moved us from protecting fisheries to protecting individual fish. That is a challenge because in operations there is impact to individual fish that are compensated for, but that isn't protecting individual fish. But the operations of electricity companies come into conflict with a number of different types of federal regulatory and legislative instruments. The Fisheries Act is one of them. Species at risk, navigable waters, and so on. And so when one is facing with all of these potential individual reviews, a one window, one approach would be more effective.
And taking the Fisheries Act as an example, like I take your point that you are hoping to get that, one review, one project standard going. But in the interim, have you had any success with the federal government in terms of figuring out how to navigate the Fisheries Act?
Yes, absolutely. We continue to meet actively. We're working very closely with the Department of Fisheries. But of course, the challenge they've got is there were legislative changes brought in 2019 that subsequently, we've realized are difficult to work through. And so we've certainly had an openness at the Department of Fisheries and Oceans. We met most recently with some of their officials today. So this is an ongoing conversation. But the challenge is they're implementing regulations under a legislative regime that needs to be changed as well. So it's not only how do we navigate the current set of regulations that are difficult, but those regulations are also under a legislative framework that also needs to be changed and updated. So there's only so much departmental officials can do in the absence of legislative change.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you. This concludes the press conference. Merci, c'est ce qui conclut cette conférence de presse.
Merci beaucoup.